Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Finance Magnets Blockchain Podcast. Today's guest is Jesse Lund of IBM, and he's going to talk about a very interesting blockchain project that they're working on. Thank you for coming, Jesse. Would you please introduce yourself to our audience and the project?
Yes, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Avi. This is a great opportunity to speak with your constituents, your subscribership about something that's really exciting. I'm Jesse Lund. I'm with IBM. I lead the global market development for blockchain and for digital currencies, our digital currency strategy. And what we're announcing this week at Sibos is really IBM's investment in the next generation of infrastructure to support correspondent banking, clearing and settlement of different asset classes, and really cross-border payments as the initial focus of this new type of blockchain transactional network.
Mm-hmm. So I think we should get to the most interesting question in my mind first, okay? Because that's so when do you think that we'll see traditional banks and central banks start issuing currency on a blockchain?
Yeah, well, the short answer is I think it may be sooner than many may think, and that many of the analysts may be predicting. If you look at some of the industry trends already, UBS and some of their cohorts have developed something called Universal Settlement Coin, I think it is, which is really a commercial bank issuance of a fiat token. But I can tell you that I would be very surprised if central banks aren't issuing some denomination of their fiat currency out into the wild for public use in some capacity, probably initially a limited capacity. But if it was longer than 6 to 12 months, I'd be shocked.
Wow, that's a real, that's basically tomorrow for a central bank.
It is. Yeah. And I think what that really means is reflective of, and part of this is knowledge I have from dialogues with a lot of central banks around the world. But is that while they're quiet right now, they have been doing their homework. You're hearing some news reports come out of different areas of the world. There are certainly more more progressive central banks and conservative central banks. But they've really been doing a lot of due diligence the past year or more. And I think where you're starting to see transactional systems from with blockchain coming to market in a limited capacity, which is what we're announcing with this cross-border universal payment solution. I think you're going to start to see central banks putting their toe in the water here fairly soon as well.
Very interesting. And what to the best of your knowledge, what area of the world will be first to adopt this? Because we're seeing there's talk about a crypto ruble from the Russian government, and now the Kazakhstan development area, special development area, is talking about launching a Kazakhstan coin. But when will we see other jurisdictions in your mind? Where do you think it's going to come from?
Yeah, well, I saw the e-ruble announcement a couple of days ago too. I thought that was really interesting, and it comes from a high source. I think it was a quote from Putin. So that's rather interesting. But so I think there's going to be several different jurisdictions that have, I think, different objectives, if you will. So I think there's a lot of activity in Asia with respect to the desire to be leading and innovative, from a financial services perspective. I just think there's a lot of activity over there, a desire to be first. I think there's some emerging economies where they could gain from the stability of sort of democratizing their fiat currency, right? So there's emerging markets that have a lot of volatility in their local fiat, and I think they're seeing this as a way to to inject more stability into their financial markets. So that's a different objective, but still a strong motivator. And then I think, like in Scandinavia, you're seeing a trend toward cashless societies. And as you get closer to a cashless society, you have to invest into the payment infrastructures, in order to maintain economic viability. And so I think that's driving the Scandinavian countries. Reichsbank, I know, has issued an RFI for this that we're looking at and responding to, but they seem to be very progressive in their approach. So those are three areas, broad geographic areas that I've seen so far, and we've talked to more than a dozen central banks over the last 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely the application for a cashless society is pretty obvious. But when you say that digital currency can inject stability into a currency, what do you mean by that? How does the technology achieve that?
Well, I think there's this notion of, and I think what I was playing on more is in some of these, emergent economies that are being impacted by, de-risking. There are people that are kind of afraid to touch their currency, and so some of them are turning to cryptocurrencies and saying, well, there's actually more stability in kind of pure play cryptocurrencies than there are in our fiat currency. And so what I mean by injecting stability is I think it takes some of the concepts of cryptocurrencies and the promises that it offers, where a higher velocity of payment, more traceability, more transparency into transactions, effectively kind of using blockchain technology to democratize their fiat more, which conceivably gets it in use by more people. And so the idea, the thought there is that that would, more people with access to a currency would bring more price stability within the currency itself. Not necessarily make it more valuable, but bring more stability, which over time I think gives it more utility. That's sort of the concept. By the way, those are my observations. In some of those emergent areas in the central banks that we're talking to around there, that's not necessarily their stated directive, but that's kind of my read of what they have to gain from something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, can you tell us more specifically about the latest project that IBM announced regarding the universal payment solution?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And I think the discussion around digital currencies and central bank issued digital currencies is really a major part of the announcement. This is not the first blockchain initiative that IBM has undertaken in the payment space. We've done a lot of work with CLS, who's a major settlement and FX provider globally. We've done some work or assisted in some work that has now transitioned into what is a SWIFT a payment message instruction reconciliation project on the blockchain. It started out on an early developer release of Hyperledger Fabric, actually back when I was at Wells Fargo. And so we've done quite a number of things with blockchain and payments, but this is kind of a new thing. And really the novelty of what we're proposing here and what we've implemented in a limited production capacity in the 12 corridors in the Pacific that we're operating in now as of last week, is that it brings clearing, the fundamental process of initiating a payment instruction to a counterparty and all of the activities that need to go on to make sure that that counterparty is eligible to receive those payments. That's kind of holistically called the clearing function. And then the settlement function, that is the physical transfer of cash with finality, happening together in near real time on the same network. That's not happening anywhere today. The way cross-border payments works is typically through a fairly complex network of correspondent banks and nostro vostro accounts, or going out to the FX market to make good on deferred net settlement. And it's a pretty complicated process that involves a lot of disconnected steps that translates into higher costs and more reconciliation and so forth. So this is a way to bring that all together. I think blockchain provides the tipping point. I think in some ways, Bitcoin provided the inspiration for all of this, a long time ago. Even though banks are not excited about cryptocurrencies, I think the inspiration for what an autonomous global, real-time gross settlement system could look like. It isn't just a concept or a theory. It's actually working. And so I think this represents the convergence of those concepts and those ideas with the mainstream of financial services into something that improves the cost structure for banks in processing cross-border payments of all types, which is why we call it a universal payment solution. And hopefully that reduced cost structure is ultimately passed on to the client, certainly in the form of less friction, of quicker settlement time, and an end user experience that's a little bit better as well.
Mm-hmm. No, it's certainly a process that needs improvement. From my own personal experience here in Israel, which is a small market, so if we want to make transfers to US or China, you got to go through intermediary banks, and that means as a consumer, you never know what will be the final cost of the transaction, because the bank you're working with usually doesn't even know who they're working with. They're punching something on a computer, and you get an answer after 2 weeks. So
and when something goes wrong too, when something goes wrong, or when you're trying to find out what's the status, because usually there's a 3 or 4 day delay in processing that. Finding out where it is can be a process in and of itself. But if this is all recorded, if all of those payment instructions and the clearing process is recorded on this immutable shared ledger, to the extent that you have access to see at least the status of the payment, you can see exactly where it is. And so that, again, that transparency leads to reduced friction. So just the experience, the end user experience, whether consumers or small businesses or large corporates, I think is going to be profound as well.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any like a timetable or a an ETA where you think this will be a consumer product, or meaning local bank branches will use this system all over the world?
Well, I can tell you that as of this announcement, we had enlisted 16 banks to participate in this first phase, right? So we've got a small region with a manageable set of transaction volume that we're running real live transactions on in the Pacific, and we wanted to do that because we didn't want to propose to all of our global banking clients a concept and then say, let's go build it together. We wanted to build a minimum viable product that actually was moving real money, and then invite the banks in to become part of shaping it into a commercial, commercialized product with the appropriate governance, and then prioritize what regions we expand this into beginning in 2018. That's kind of our roadmap and go-to-market strategy. And I can tell you, there's a lot of different banks that have different corridors in mind. And just being here at Sibos this week in Toronto, there's 2 Israeli banks that have come forward. And I won't mention their names yet because we haven't talked to them. One of my colleagues just texted me and said she talked to them and they are interested in this. And so, you mentioned when will the consumers be able to see the products? It really is dependent upon the banks, because IBM is never going to be, kind of a consumer payments provider. That's not our core business. We're really looking to be the network operator, kind of the plumbing or the pipeline that helps the banks to move money faster in an effort to, help promote that improved user experience and that, optimized efficiency in cost structure, et cetera. So hopefully it'll be soon. Hopefully it'll be 2018. I think to your point, Israel would be a great, Israel to the U.S. and Israel to Europe and the U.K. would be great corridors to go focus on, and to partner with some of the banks in Israel to provide those services, or to at least augment the existing services that are there to make them faster and cheaper.
Definitely, and from the banks, the innovation centers that I got to speak here, so I can probably guess who are the two.
Good. That's right. I think I have their cards here, but yeah, I mean, we're very hopeful. And my sister lives in Tel Aviv, and so I said, well, that sounds like a good opportunity. Let's chase after that one first, because I can go visit my sister too. So I have ulterior motives.
Yeah, it's also a small market. It's great for testing out new products. Samsung does it sometimes. They launch here before all the rest of the world, so we can give them the first test of a new phone. But beside that, I wanted to know specifically about IBM. So what's the importance of blockchain technology to IBM? Like, how do you see this as part of your business?
Yeah, great question. So I get to answer this question, I think, very objectively, because I'm a new IBMer. I've only been at IBM 10 months. I joined from Wells Fargo, where I spent most of my career, about almost 2 decades, 18 years, in a whole variety of capacities, from wealth management to consumer banking to risk management to commercial banking, technology, information security, the whole gamut. And I finished my tenure at Wells for the last 3 years as the head of the innovation lab. And that's where I got exposure to blockchain, among other things. So I was responsible for the blockchain strategy and to some degree Wells Fargo's exploration of cryptocurrencies, which was pretty easy, because they knew right away they didn't want to be involved in pure play cryptos. So that was an easy bet. But we did experiment with Bitcoin in the early days to make some of those conclusions. And so I really fell in love with the potential that blockchain has to transform financial services, I think, for the greater good. And by that, I mean, it's not just about the social good of making people's lives better, which is definitely a part of the equation, right? When you think about, financial inclusion and the 2 billion, unbanked people that exist in emerging economies. But it also represents a greater good for the banks themselves. I mean, they can operate more efficiently and be more profitable. They can go into these new regions with less risk, which allows them to offer services to unbanked clients that they traditionally wouldn't. And so as I surveyed where I would go and landed on IBM and leveraged some of the contacts that I had from the IBM Wells Fargo relationship to come here, I really felt that IBM had all of the key capabilities that would be required to execute something like this on a global scale, right? On a national level, in terms of payments and other core transactional capabilities. And so all that translates into IBM hired me. They listened to what I said when I said, here's what I would do if I were running this company, and to some degree there was some credence given to that. Really, IBM, it's no secret, is undergoing a transformation of itself and its business practices, its business model. 20 or so quarters of revenue decline is really reflective of an investment kind of back in to change how IBM engages with its clients. And that's, I think, most prominent in the blockchain division. I mean, what this represents is not just IBM being a technology vendor, a good technology vendor to its clients and responding, thoughtfully and competitively to RFPs, but what it represents is IBM hiring domain experts from different industries, and a big part of IBM's portfolio is financial services, in order to partner with its clients, with all of the major banks and financial institutions around the world, and say, we don't just want to sell to you, we want to partner with you, especially in some of these big markets, right? We want to be a part of the operating network and really be the network operator that helps you build these new transactional business networks, where our long game is not just the tech vendor, but it's actually to provide the things that we're good at on an ongoing basis and to derive revenue from those. So I think it's a great value proposition to the banks, because we're saying, hey, this is new, but we totally believe in it from the top of the house. The messaging you hear from Jenny all the way down is consistent. We believe in this technology and its transformative power, the benefits that it brings from a social good and a business good, and we want to be a part of it. We as a company want to be a part of it, not just selling technology. So it's a really important part of a revised new way of client engagement from an IBM perspective, I think.
I see. Another aspect of the technology that I see IBM really emphasizing, and every time they're stressing, is that they use is open source, including in this project, right? And Hyperledger. And I wanted to know what's the importance of open source for a company like IBM.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look around the world today, you can kind of see this coming. But if you look at the threat of cyber risk, right? That are going after these kind of centralized proprietary honeypots, where there's a lot of customer private personal information or financial information. I think what you're seeing is the model where one or two big entities come together and develop something in a proprietary way actually presents a bigger risk tolerance, or a bigger risk profile to security. And so recognizing that, especially in the blockchain space, which is more of a peer-to-peer construct to begin with, IBM right up front realized that the notion of community process and open source was imperative, right? We have to be able to review openly the security characteristics of this software, because we're talking about building the next generation of financial infrastructure on top of it. We're talking about real money, and not just a little bit of money. If you're looking at the payment space, you're talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars US that move around every year. I mean, it's huge. It's systemically important. And so our commitment to the technology governance process really was part of our becoming a founding member of the Hyperledger project, and why we've promoted it with the Linux Foundation so much is because we believe that's the proper way to do software development in this day and age where everything is connected, and in some ways everything is at risk. The more you involve the community in the development process, the more you reduce the risk profile, and reduce your exposure.
Mm-hmm. So it's as a Linux user, I definitely agree that cybersecurity wise, it's much smarter to have every programmer in the world would have the ability to overlook your code and make sure you're not putting any backdoors or anything in there that might might endanger you. Yeah. So again, regarding the project, I wanted to know about your partnership with ClickX and Stellar. If you can tell us more about that.
Yeah, sure. So I'll let me just say, as I kind of introduce both of them, they fill different roles in the ecosystem that we're developing as part of this. ClickX fills the role of a payment services provider and a market maker, which are two functions within the process flow of payments themselves and international payments themselves. So you can think of ClickX really as the inaugural subscriber to this new network. They are bringing payment volumes forward on a legacy system. Now, the way that we met them was kind of happenstance through the industry. It's really fun because IBM is being connected to all sorts of startups, and they were originally funded through the United Nations and through SWIFT. They won InnoTribe, many years back. They're kind of a financial inclusion play, bringing stability to, the economies of the Pacific Island nations. And it was attractive to us because they're systemically involved in that area. So the concepts of, international payments and foreign exchange and fractional reserve banking and all of these concepts are the same, but the scale there in the Pacific is much smaller, right? So it afforded us an opportunity to say, hey, we want to make this real. We want to do live transactions in parallel with your legacy systems. And of course, they were hitting the wall in terms of scalability as their business expands for their proprietary systems that were built really before the onset of the blockchain phenomenon. So it was kind of a win-win. So they're kind of the inaugural subscriber. It's a safe, or at least a relatively manageable area in terms of transaction volume and an overall payment volume. So it's a great partnership, and it's kind of interesting because Robert Bell, who's the chairman and founder of ClickX, who was on a panel with me at Sibos yesterday, was just flooded after the panel with inquiries from all of these major bankers who were here because he's so smart. Now it's funny because the markets are different; they're a lot smaller, but the concepts are the same, and just the expertise that he demonstrated through his answers to the hard questions that I was asking him about, this business were really profound. And so I'm encouraged because I think what we're doing here, in some ways kind of, I don't want to say levels the playing field, but it opens up the market to banks and financial institutions of all sizes. And I know that has some implications for some of the big banks who kind of hold the corner on certain markets, but I think they do that out of necessity, not necessarily out of an intention to maintain, a proprietary hold or an oligopoly of sorts. And so I was really encouraged to see the dialogue that emerged out of that. So that's kind of why we partnered with ClickX. It's a manageable way to get started in a real way. And like I said, we're moving live monetary transactions across 12 corridors, 7 currencies right now. It's pretty profound. I don't know anybody else that's doing that, in production, or at least not following this model on blockchain. Stellar, on the other hand, who, by the way, has joined Hyperledger as part of this, as IBM have developed the Hyperledger Fabric software. The focus really has been on enterprise blockchain, and enterprise blockchain I think has taken traditionally a parallel or a divergent path from the cryptocurrency model, where cryptos are all about let's get payments and live money transactions working autonomously from any banking system, right? Because we don't want to deal with the banks. And on the other hand, whatever it is, 40% of IBM's revenue comes from all the banks around the world. So we're saying, well, the merits of the technology are important, but we want to help our customers succeed. And you're starting to see this, this convergence of capability. But what that meant is that when we developed Hyperledger, the initial, release of Hyperledger Fabric, we were really focused on creating a general purpose blockchain platform that could support, at an enterprise scale, very core capabilities, like distributed storage and workflow management and provenance and all these core characteristics or attributes of a blockchain. And as we build up from there, because a comprehensive blockchain platform strategy needs to not only provide those things, right, but also needs to provide what I would call higher order services or capabilities like digital identity. A global digital identity would be a profound thing to have for financial services. but also the ability to monetize the platform, right? To provide counterparties an ability to pay themselves within the ecosystem of the blockchain, right? Because that ability to clear and settle transactions wasn't there. And so as we're developing out, Hyperledger Fabric to be, kind of that core platform, we registry strategy. Yeah, you could build it on Hyperledger Fabric, but it's built into Stellar already, right? Whereas this notion of asset issuance and the ability to exchange assets for each other through a built-in order book, again, all built into Stellar, right? I mean, that's essentially what it is purpose-built. And so as we looked at Stellar vis-a-vis the other blockchain platforms that have been emerging, it really had attributes, functional attributes, and performance characteristics that were very aligned to Hyperledger and Hyperledger Fabric. And so one of the reporters I talked to, Fortune Magazine, said, noticed that, wow, all of a sudden now with Stellar joining Hyperledger, the Hyperledger project has its own native asset, like the Ethereum Enterprise, Alliance has Ether. And I thought, wow, I didn't really realize it that way. And I don't think that Lumens, which is part of Stellar, it's really their native asset that provides a bridge. But their model, I think, is to enable asset issuers like central banks to be able to securely issue their own tokens on their network. And that's the part that's attractive to us, not so much the cryptocurrency part, because again, as we discussed earlier, our longer game is to see central authorities issuing their own assets on a blockchain and making use of those.
I see. Well, I want to thank our guests for a very informative talk today. Please share, like, and subscribe so you can keep following us. Thank you.
Hey, sorry about that. I somehow got a hiccup there.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. No worries. We're we're out of time anyway. So I just want to thank you very much for taking the time.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Very nice to meet you. And maybe when we get over to Israel, I can say hello in person.
Definitely. I'd love that.
Okay. Thanks so much for your
Bye-bye.
time. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.